we're live, or live-ish.
Live-ish. We are live-ish if members of the public want to join us. We do have members of the Budget Committee and Select Board in joint meeting tonight for the annual capital planning meeting. Basically the second page of the handout gives you tonight's agenda, which is just a welcome, a discussion of the capital plan spreadsheet, a look at the 2022 projects, an open discussion on capital planning so we can perhaps get some direction, some thoughts, and maybe even some of the mechanics on how we do this, and then adjourn. And with that, I just, that's really my welcome. I do have concerns about public participation, and I hope as we get into the public hearings, we figure out ways to increase public participation. I don't think a lot of the public necessarily comes to the capital investment meeting, but it's just on my mind, and I wanted to share that briefly with everybody. So I have with me tonight, I'm Bruce Burgoyne, and this is being recorded and it'll be uploaded to YouTube, so we will go through the introductions. And Chris Sammons is here. Ralph Eno is here from the Select Board, and Dennis Price and Catherine Woodsum also from the Select Board. And so I'll just turn this over to Andy to introduce his members and any initial remarks he wants to make.
Okay, I'm Andy Tallman from the Budget Committee, and we have Rebecca Lambert, Ed Sims, Marty, and Ellen Schneider. So we have a full quorum now. We're all in here and happy to talk about long-term capital planning.
Great. And Ed, Eric, you're here, and Teresa as well, right?
Teresa, I'm not sure where she is. Let me see if she's on the screen.
She's here.
Oh, there she is. Yep.
Yep.
All right, excellent.
Welcome, and thank you for being here. So are you all set, Andy? Did you have any further remarks?
No, I'm happy to just roll along. Thank you.
Okay, and this is kind of a roll-along meeting. I'm going to let Eric walk us through things. I think that's the plan, and anybody else who has a different direction that this should go in should just pretty much speak up. So we'll start with taking a look at the current year projects. And Eric, I'm just going to turn it over to you. We do have in the packet, and this is available online too, some of the reference materials.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll start screen sharing, and that should show up for everybody.
It does. Thank you.
All right. Let me get into the slideshow from the beginning. All right. So Bruce went through the first couple of slides, and the introductions are complete. So the next slide addresses some of the planning goals, and these are similar to what we have at our usual hearings and meetings, and has been carried through for the last several years with capital planning and other goals. I guess, as Bruce was talking about public participation, the idea of having recommendations and public discussion are always on the agenda. So I will move on. This 5-year plan slide just represents a summary, a look of what we're going to be talking about. And so what I will do is just step aside from this presentation that we'd started, and we'll look at the actual spreadsheet, and we can go, or the spreadsheets, I guess it's plural, and then we can then have a bit of discussion about the detail level, and then we can walk back a little bit into the summary slides that conclude the presentation here. So if I go to Excel, should be here. So everybody's still seeing this Excel spreadsheet?
So Eric,
yes,
and Andy, and anybody else who wishes to ask, do we want to save some discussion on this, or do we want to try to take this in chunks as we go through the 5-year plan? I want to make sure that people have an opportunity, if something's on the top of the mind, perhaps to do that or use an approach that works best for the group for discussion.
I personally would lean towards if we have clarifying questions to ask them while they're hot, but if we have substantive things to talk about, we lump those together, but that's just personal preference.
I typically like to approach discussion that way. So that's what we'll do for the most part, unless we're violently overruled, right, Andy?
Right.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Eric.
I think you'll have a good approach. All right, so I'll share again here with the other screen. Okay, so this is the spreadsheet that we use for our 5-year plan. It is not terribly complicated. It essentially identifies the project areas, or at the department level, more or less, and then moving on, you have the project or task that is identified, or the item or the piece of equipment. We then have a discussion of the action that is to be taken in relation to that item or project. And then we have the initial year of construction or replacement. We have the life expectancy of the item or equipment. And then we expected replacement and date based on the lifespan and the initial. And then we move on to the expected cost of replacement. And these numbers are updated periodically. I've got some notes here at the bottom to highlight the fact that we do look at the numbers pretty much annually, and oftentimes in between as things come up or projects get completed, and we look at the costs, and we also look at the lifespans, because as we learn and see how these things behave, and we know that a pickup truck's going to last us, a new one will last us 12 years, a used one would last us 1 or 2. So those are some of the things that we do update regularly.
So Eric,
yes.
Eric, to clarify, just for anybody who watches this on YouTube later, if you take a look at the second item at the library, that's the septic tank. It was installed in 2006. It has a 25-year lifespan. We expect in 2031 to replace it at around $6,000.
Yep, that's exactly right. And what would happen is when we are going through the process of this 5-year plan in 2024 or 2025, we'd probably start thinking about that septic, and we might put something or have an operational item to do an inspection, right? And so then we can update and say, is that a realistic expectation in the next 2 years, or can we push it out, or do we need to pull it back? So that type of review is ongoing, and that's a great example to use that one. And so then we have the horizon, and it shows 5 years, including the fiscal year that we are budgeting for, as well as the current fiscal year, so we can have an idea of what's being spent currently. And so this is just the master sheet, I guess I call it, and I also have a roads and infrastructure list. This is what we use to populate, in large part, the roads section on this master list, because this gives us the detail we need. What's not shown here are a number of the cells, UVXY. I think I missed one there. W, there we go, TUVW. If I unhide those, you can see that what we have are factors that we use to calculate the cost of everything from liquid asphalt binder to the asphalt tonnages that we use to when we actually apply. Also gravel road factors, things that affect the cost of rebuilding or resurfacing gravel roads, installed cost and things of that nature. So this is just a bit of background to show what goes into the calculation for some of these numbers. I'll say some are much more technical and accurate than others. What we do for paving every year, I think, is probably one of the more robust calculations we do. Otherwise, we might use things like a bid or a quote from a contractor or past replacement cost to calculate what items will will look like. So this is the what we have for paving. The light gray represents the current fiscal year. And this is a change too from the past. I hadn't always identified clearly the breakout by fiscal year from a budgetary perspective. But I think this is a good change. It gives us a pretty solid understanding going forward of what we might expect to see and where we might have a bump. For example, in 2025, we're going to have a $215,000 bump. That's pretty significant. Not as significant as what we have in 2022, but it gives us an idea of where we're headed and what the costs are going to be. And so then in another summary sheet, before we get back into the details, is the transfer station. In this sheet, we use to calculate again, similar numbers, but with a slightly different focus. This sheet is used to also help estimate what we want to put forward for our partner towns for the capital reserve cost that we all share. This year, we've bumped the capital outlay up to about 10% of the operating budget, and that should be around $24,000. And as you can see on an annualized basis, that's going to meet our needs on an annualized basis. But when you start looking at individual projects and costs, things change dramatically, and we have to be creative at times. So that's a similar spreadsheet. And then I also included this year something I haven't in the past, but just some notes on borrowing that I picked up. I think it's important that we discuss borrowing as a part of our capital meetings, and we haven't always done it as directly as I think we might do it tonight, in part because we actually have some borrowing proposed. But these are just some indices that Moody's uses, and also the state law that we have to adhere to. One thing you'll notice, and most of you are aware of, is that when I put together my report for the town meeting warrant, every article that's for borrowing, I have to show what our debt is in relation to our overall valuation. And we are, I think, somewhere at like 1 or 2%. We have about a $300 million total valuation, and we are, I think, even including some of the school debt, well away from that 7% number. So that is one of the things that I'm sure we'll talk about, is our financial health and our capacity for borrowing. So that's just the summary of the sheet. And so I'll go back to this report that I have and just identify a few of the things that are coming down. Again, FY21 or 22, which is the current budgeted year, the one we're talking about and planning for, is in the green column, so folks can follow along pretty easily with that and see what's coming up. So cemeteries, we do have a reserve. This, I'll say, was not asked for by the cemetery committee. Some of these things that I'm presenting are manager recommendations, and in the past we have had a cemetery reserve. I think it's important because we do have some significant outstanding projects, and I do believe it's easy to forget sometimes about the cemeteries, and we've seen that happen in the past where we had nothing in reserve, and we had some needs that we've been working through for the last 4 or 5 years. So moving on to, and I guess I'll stop right here and say, if someone has a question, just yell my name, because I'm looking at the spreadsheet. I can't see the video right now. So. All right, so with that, I will move on and talk about the library. We do have proposed a $50,000 line for the installation of that egress that we had originally planned for. And I'll say this a few times tonight, COVID certainly put us behind where we wanted to be with getting that work done. I'm certain we'll get it done. I know that it's important and it will get accomplished. It just wasn't, this year wasn't the year, and of other factors, including overruns on the project overall, the fire expansion in the library roof, pushed us to the point where we weren't able to achieve that. But we are planning for it, and we do have a quote from S.J. Wood for that work. We know that the work will cost this much or less, depending on how we approach it.
Eric, may I ask a question?
Sure.
is that just the egress or does that include the other work that we talked about to the second story of that building?
That is just the egress. And so
But
what
we're
I'm
gonna
going to
put,
Go
sorry, we're
ahead.
gonna put that back out to bid because we thought that bid was probably not on the mark.
We
Is that
thought it was
correct?
very high, yes, and this will go out to bid. And the expectation is that, and maybe I shouldn't be expecting this, but that we would come in, at $20,000 or $30,000 for a set of stairs connected to the side of a building, and have $20,000 to $30,000 additional available for those other, items that we had discussed, many of which could be absorbed under an operating type budget, but yeah, so that's kind of the thinking on this one. That is the thinking, is that if and when this does come in less than that, we will have some room for those other project items.
So I'm just wondering if maybe we should retitle that instead of just building egress and second floor renovation or repair. I'm not suggesting that what I say is what you need to type in there, but
It's a good suggestion. I actually had thought about that, and it was one of the things I hadn't actually had a chance to update. So
Thank
no,
you.
it's a clearer representation of what's going to be there, and I'll Control S right now. So there we go. Look at that. It's real.
Hi, Eric, I have a question about that one.
Sure, Marty.
Okay, can you mark that as something to discuss at the end when we talk about not just factual questions, but other issues?
Yes, I will make a note of that on my pad here, and we will get back to it. I'll make sure we don't miss anything.
Thanks.
Hmm.
I'd appreciate that because it's my understanding this is part of what might be included in a borrowing, and it's not all capital work. So that concerns me.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And yeah, and we'll talk about borrowing later. There's some options there. All right, so moving on to administration, we do have a $10,000 reserve for Guile Hall. That's the same as what we had last year. Originally, I plugged in 20,000 in the 5-year plan from last year, believing that we might have additional needs in the coming fiscal year for additional ADA work. But the $10,000 that we spent in FY20 and 21 has accomplished those goals, I think, pretty soundly. We were originally looking at putting additional improvements into the restrooms, but those certainly, after reviewing the guidelines that are out there for ADA, we're okay. We meet the expectations. And so this is our 10,000 annual reserve. I did do away with that in future years because we have additional spending that's coming up that will utilize in all likelihood, we will have some designated fund balance used to offset a couple of these expenditures. This one out here, once we get to the larger ones, the windows and such, we may want to look at a different approach, but we're a couple of years out from that.
Question here. Looking at, there was another exhibit that you had emailed out that was showing the carry forward balances.
Yes,
and,
yep.
For Guile Hall, the estimated balance as of June 30th, 21 is $37,500. How high do you want that reserve to get?
Well, I think probably not much higher than it is now, because what we'll be doing is we'll draw down, we'll add 10,000 this year. That'll put us at close to 50, and then we would be more or less fully expending that over the next 2 years, FY23 and FY24. So we have a couple options going forward. We could carry, a steady reserve account forward to build up towards this, FY25, but it might be wise to just run these two improvements and then make this and perhaps the parking lot part of a future bond. But we've got a couple options there, and I'm certainly looking for some direction and thoughts on that from the board and the budget committee.
Go ahead, Eric.
Okay, great. So moving on to recreation parks and activities, what we have is a $55,000 expense anticipated for the fairgrounds, and this is a continuation of the project that was started many years ago, and resulted in the Keene Memorial Field, I guess is what we call it now. And it was a community-based project. The rec board is leading this process, and they do look at this as a very similar project. Of this $55,000 in expenditures, they're expecting that approximately 45 of that is going to come from donations, with 5,000 from the tax base and 5,000 from their reserve. And this covers the full estimated construction cost and engineering cost, which are, I will say at this point, very rough. And we're starting to work with an engineer now to get a better estimate of what that's actually going to cost. So this is a project that I think would be great to get started this year. I don't know as we will see it move forward, in any substantial way without some real effort. But if it does, we're prepared for it. And if it doesn't, we will not see $45,000 in revenue, and we will not see $55,000 in expenditure. What we may see would be the $5,000 to $10,000 for engineering and design work that's going to be covered. As I mentioned, 5,000 out of the reserve for the recreation board and 5,000 out of tax dollars. And this is one that we've discussed a few times with mixed opinions, but I'm recommending that we have an open space reserve. I think that we can do this without having an impact that's too significant on the tax base, and I think it's an important consideration. But again, if there are other opinions or other perspectives on it, happy to discuss those now or at a later time.
Eric, is this expansion to the purpose to create a soccer field?
Soccer and softball. I think the original plan for the facility showed actually two ball fields kind of catty corner to one another, with a soccer field in the middle. And so they're looking to complete that. One of the reasons being that the rec board has seen some, I guess, perceived or real inequity in the fact that the softball fields that are available at the school are limited, and we have many more baseball fields in town, and the ball field at the fairgrounds is actually designed to be a ball field dimensionally. So it it could be an equity issue, but really I think it's just they're looking to expand and improve the recreational opportunities that exist wholly, and you see that in other areas as well.
Wasn't there talk about wanting to put in a basketball court?
There was, and they the rec board, by my understanding, has since decided that they would rather pursue this as a priority.
Okay.
And I can't say why. That's just that's what I've been told. So I think it may have been a little bit easier, I think, to pursue the basketball court because it would be a lower cost and a bit more approachable. But I think that they really are looking to start off a major campaign or tradition of investing in this stuff, and they see that ball field as a priority. So,
Eric, this is David Trinnell. I hear a lot around town about the lack of adequate fields for girls softball. So are you saying that the $55,000 for the field expansion would not give the girls softball teams the field they need?
It would. That's part of the reason why they're proposing that. That expenditure.
Okay, thanks.
It was part of the original plan for the whole facility, and the ball field, the standard ball field got built first. Understandably, I mean, they had a limited budget and all that. So, yeah, okay, great question. Thank you, David.
So Eric, go ahead, please.
Do we have any idea at this point what the groundwater situation is in the proposed development area?
The groundwork?
Groundwater.
Oh, groundwater. We know that there is surface water and intermittent, wet areas, things like that. That's part of what the engineering money will be for. That 10,000, 5 to 10,000, is to help ascertain if this is, even feasible to do on that site, because I'm not sure a permit was pulled when they did it the first time. I haven't seen one anyway, but in any event, I know there was some review and the Conservation Commission was involved. That'll be happening again, but really the engineering money is there to help ascertain that.
Yeah, because if for whatever reason there are serious drainage issues, I'm looking at that number and past experience tells me that that's probably not going to be sufficient to do any kind of major field development if you have drainage remediation to do.
I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So
So
we'll know early on.
Eric, I'm kind of keeping a tab. So for example, when Marty wants to talk about the library a little further. Later on, I'd like to talk about the beach and the timing of those last two projects a little further.
Sure. Yep. The 25 and the 20. Okay. Yep. Great. Beach projects.
Eric, can you just explain what open space reserve would be used for?
Yeah, the intent would be to either purchase land outright for recreation, conservation, athletic purposes, or for the purchase of or open space, or the purchase of development rights for or easements for open space. This kind of came up much more actively after the farm at the top of the hill by Plains Road became the subject of a solar development, and fortunately we had some very active and talented folks on our committees who were able to work with the property owner and secure an agricultural easement through the main farmland trust. Those type of things can happen and do happen, and not just for a development like a solar project, but it could be something around a subdivision or maybe a farmland additionally in other places in town that we might want to preserve. So the idea is that we would have the ability to either purchase easements or purchase land outright.
Can I say that I like this idea? You don't need an astronomical amount of money in this reserve fund. What it does, at least at the outset, is it gets you to the table with earnest money so that you can negotiate in good faith. And I think it makes very good sense, given the development pressures that are going on in central Maine right now, to position the town to be able to do that.
Okay. Anything else on recreation? I will summarize all this stuff in the presentation that I will run through much more quickly than I'm running through this. All right, great. So we can move on now down to roads and infrastructure. And again, I showed that spreadsheet, and I just wanted to show that these are the road sections that we're specifically talking about. Sturdivant Hill Road in its entirety, and Plains Road in its entirety. And these two combined are a significant amount of expenditure. Sturdivant Hill Road, excuse me, and Plains Road both have significant mileage. When you get the right series of cells here. When you add them up, we're talking about 5.7 miles, which is perhaps 1/7 of our total road network. So it's a sizable chunk, and it's a bit unfortunate these two come together, but I think that they both are in need of repair, and we have vetted this with the road committee and talked about it. So I think that we're in a good spot, and I will go back. Go ahead.
Are we doing a spring project?
We are, yes.
And what is that project?
Well, it's one or both. What we've done is we've actually put together the RFP for both projects with the anticipation that we will have one project, paid for and completed in this fiscal year and one completed and paid for in the next, if we can make the scheduling work out. That would be, ideal, and the auditors would be happy. If it doesn't work out exactly that way, we do have reserve funds available, and we do have the ability to complete the work, even if even if it's
So you're talking
out of
about these
sequence.
2 roads this spring?
Well, potentially. One of them we would hope to happen in July or August. But if the opportunity arose and it was the only viable time frame, what I'm saying is we could do both of those this spring. But
Right,
that'll
but
depend on the RFP process.
I guess my question is, what is in the fiscal 21 budget for roads?
Fiscal 21 budget for roads, I believe, was $150,000 reserve. Let me look back. Let's see. Well, actually, so this is actually what I had budgeted, the 187. That is not the number that's in our actual budget. That's the number I put in that I anticipate spending this year. Let me look someplace else here. This will give us a better idea. Let's see.
I actually don't care about that too much. What I care about is knowing whether or not there's monies in those 2 years that you're talking about already designated.
Yes, there are. And so if I go to the budget summary from last year,
So this is not a 400K project down the road, so to speak. But there's some money that's already been designated for part of this project.
yes, that's absolutely right. Yep.
Okay, and I'm not talking about reserve. I'm talking about previous capital planning.
Yes, yep,
Well,
that's
which
right.
is reserved. Yeah.
Which is reserve, yeah, in many ways. So,
Okay. Thank you.
and when we look at the, maybe that's a better way to look at it. If we go to FY21 carry forwards here, well, we're jumping around a little bit, but I think that's okay.
Bruce, I think what I heard Eric say is that if we do this project as one combined project, we'd be paying for part of it in June and part of it in July. So it would be split amongst the 2 budget years.
That's what I'm trying to understand. But
Yeah,
that's
that's right. Yep.
okay, great.
So looking at this is the spreadsheet that Marty mentioned, I think, showing the reserve balances. Roads capital, this is the line that we would be taking paving out of. And what we had started off with 190,000 in roads capital, ending up with 148. That excludes what we had budgeted for. Go ahead. Yep.
So the logical
421 paving.
Okay.
Yep.
So the logical public question that would arise if somebody was looking at this is when they look at the pave again schedule 24, 24, and 25 for the Plains Road, are we accelerating?
Well, let's look.
I'm looking at your road work schedule.
We are accelerating a little bit. Yes, we are. So that's a good point.
I'm assuming this inspection and need are recognized and
yes. Yeah,
cycle.
that's right.
It looks
so
like the problem is how much was coming due in 2025. So it looks like the road committee has tried to spread that out over a number of years. So we don't have to do a bond to pay for all of the road work at once.
That's exactly right. That was part of the discussion that we had about trying to break this up. And sort of it would be one of the next ones in queue, and it's one that's in the most need outside of Plains. And or Church Road. If you look down at Church Road, this one actually is going to be. I did put that for 2025, but I guess that Beaver Dam in there too. Just Church Road. That one really is in poor enough condition that it should be done immediately, but we're planning on holding off until we actually, if and when we do the sidewalk project, and do it at the same time. So that, I think, makes a lot of sense, rather than having to rebuild a sidewalk or build a sidewalk on top of a road that was paved a year or two ago. So there is some rationale for this, and these priorities, just like other projects, do get looked at, and the road committee did look at this and decide that this was what they felt to be a reasonable approach. Once you get more than a couple years out, it's hard to tell, honestly.
Sure.
We have to go from experience. And right now, one thing you'll see is this paving cycle that I have here. It's pretty much 12 years for everybody. It is 12 years for everybody. And we know that's not right. That's one of the last things that we need to adapt and play around with from a planning perspective, because we know Adele Road is probably going to last 20 to 25 years because it has just residential traffic. And we know that South gets hit pretty hard and it's going to need repair sooner. So this has been an evolving tool, and yeah, I just wanted to point that out, that the priorities do change and will change, especially once we start tweaking some of the lifespan expectancies.
Eric, this is David Trinnell. I've been on the Sturtevant Hill Road a couple times in the last 6 months, and I don't recall any obvious weaknesses in the road surface. And so I'm wondering if the decision to recommend this for 2021 as opposed to further out 2022, 23 is based on this notion of the 12-year life cycle. And related to that, I'm wondering, don't we get some advantage to advance technology with each prior pavement, so that the cycle could be longer than 12 years average?
Yeah, it could be. It could be. And we do have, the materials they're putting out do improve over time. Although I've had, I can't count how many pavers tell me that once they went from the good old asphalt to the polymer additive stuff after the EPA got involved, and this is their words, not mine, that the asphalt turned to garbage. And I don't feel it's quite that bad, but there definitely were some changes there when you go from a straight petroleum base to one that is also including additives. But to your original question about the scheduling, part of our paving plan, our paving management plan and cycle, is to catch roads before they have potholes, before they have major failures. Sturtevant Hill is starting to see some transverse cracking across the road, and we've had to take care of a few of those issues. But in the end, one of the best things that you can do with pavement is to keep it in good shape. It actually costs less to pave a road that's in good condition than it does to pave a road that's in bad condition after it's started to fail. So one of the things that we've shown in the past, but I haven't done and won't do tonight, is that like a bell curve showing the pavement life, and I guess it's just half of a bell curve. Once you get past the peak performance of a road, the cost to repair it goes up. And so that's something that the road committee does consider in recommending and proposing these expenditures.
Just one last question. About
Sure.
5 to 10 years ago, the town engaged a contractor to, at least on Old Kents Hill Road, hot seal the cracks that were obvious. And my impression was that it extended the life of the road significantly. Is that something that this road committee is considering?
Yeah, they do look at that for all the roads. Old Kents Hill was actually, is in rough shape. Those crack seals have started to separate. If you walk down the road in the springtime, you can see the sheeting coming across from the snowbanks melting, and it'll hit one of those lines and it'll stop dead in its tracks. And so it's a good temporary fix, but it's not a long-term fix. And it's certainly something that if we can avoid having to do crack sealing, it will extend the life of the pavement overall. So that's another one of those things where tends to cost less to fix it properly and before it starts to fail than after, because once you have those cracks in place, they will reflect back up through. And Old Kents Hill Road is a great example of that. Those cracks that are there now that were sealed were in the underlying asphalt in most cases. And so the cracks then, every time you have a crack form, it continues on upwards to the next layer because it's already weakened underneath it. So again, crack sealing is a great thing to do if you miss your window, but it's not necessarily something you want to do as a way to extend pavement life, if that makes any sense.
All right. Thanks, Eric. I've got to leave the meeting, but those were the items that I was most interested in, and compliments on a terrific presentation. It's really a standalone, user-friendly presentation. So thank you very much.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and thanks for speaking up.
Great, we'll proceed and try to move through this in the next 15 minutes or so we can use some adequate discussion time, and we'll obviously extend the meeting if we need to.
Absolutely. Well, I think that I will be going very quickly through that slideshow, but next item that we had wanted to look at was the Church Road sidewalk outside of the regular paving schedule. That is budgeted for $45,000 in total expenditure. Again, that's the total expense for the phase 1 of this project, which includes the engineering and design components. This is as estimated by Maine DOT, and these are significantly more than what we had 4 years ago when we originally applied for the project. It was probably half that amount, along with the overall project cost. This includes the DOT share and the town of Readfield share. So the town will be contributing about $9,000, and the DOT will be putting in $36,000. Next item is the salt sand shed, and this is one that we have been looking at for a few years now. What I'm proposing at this point is a saving plan that will get us either a long way towards a very substantial building or all the way towards a more light-duty construction building that would be what you see popping up around a lot of Maine towns, which is a concrete block, large block. The things weigh 2 tons, I think, but large concrete block foundation on an asphalt pad with a hoop house, basically, like an oversized carport. Very strong steel tubing and solid, vinyl covering, but similar idea, just upscaled. So we don't know what's going to happen with this one. We do know that the repair costs were astronomical the last time we put it out to bid, and the housing market or the construction market is no better now than it was then. We also know that the building is still in, serviceable condition and will be for a number of years. So this plan, what it does is gives us money in the bank if something happens, but also prepares us to be proactive if in 2 or 3 years we find that we want to proceed with either a large project or a smaller one. Basically, this is just a stopgap to cover our bases and make sure we have funds available to take care of that need when it does become more acute. And Ralph had a question earlier that he asked me before the meeting about this, the pad. And the reason that's in here is that is a separate pad. It's actually the asphalt that is in front of the salt sand shed that currently exists. It's the area that we use for staging. It's the area that they use for mixing the salt and sand. And that is getting pretty beat up, and we'll need to touch that up. So in the FY23, we'll want to take a look at that because it does need to get maintained in order to have a good solid surface so that we don't have sand or salt leaching into the ground. All right, transfer station. This is one where we show our combined reserve for the all 3 towns. And again, as I noted, it is that 10% of the operating budget. And that's up from 8. We're trying to build up this account because we recognize that we don't necessarily have a lot of capacity for significant projects which are on the horizon, or for borrowing if we wanted to pursue it that way. So we may need some creative thinking around this one, but what we have now is an increase in that baseline level of savings, which in this case, for the current fiscal year that we're planning for, when you add those two up, it's around $20,000. And that's just under, the savings amount. So we'll come out a little bit ahead. But as you can see, we have both these leases going on into the future for several years. So if we do build this account at, say, $5,000 a year or so, we're not going to have a lot of capacity. Right now, I think we're around 25 or maybe 35,000. Adding 5 to that and then dropping 20 out next year, in addition to what we would be spending on a rolling basis, puts us in a tight spot, and it would allow us more or less to complete work through 2025, but we're still going to come up short when we have this major expense, which is one that I think we will want to talk about moving perhaps forward in the schedule. It's been a priority for the board for a while. It's a priority for the Solid Waste Committee. But right now, we don't have a viable financial mechanism to do that, because the bonding on a project this size, or a long-term lease, a 5-year lease, we just don't have the financial capacity to cover that. So we have to be creative about that. All right, I'll move on to the next. Fire department. We have a couple of items here. First is the building, the routine equipment reserve, and this is something that we had started. We used to have all of these individual, almost all of these set out as individual accounts. We had a separate reserve for equipment. We had a separate reserve for fire trucks. We had a separate reserve for breathing apparatus. And so now those have been combined. And one of the things that we recognize that we need to do is to put money away every year for those expenditures. The fire department does a very good job of rolling any unused funds they have into that operating reserve, or the capital reserve. So they always seem to put in $15,000 or $20,000 a year out of unexpended operating, in addition to what we're looking at here for a line for a scheduled savings. I can't say that's a good thing or a bad thing necessarily. I like to see less money left over at the end of the year, but again, it does help feed that reserve and makes it so that we can have a smaller amount in this line. So ultimately it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. That's the easy one to talk about. The next one is the sprinkler system, which was originally not going to be necessary with the fire station expansion. However, we did, and we've talked about this a number of times, have an issue where the design and the construction phase were a year apart. And during that year, the standards changed, and we weren't able to respond to that change in a timely way. Excuse me. And so we were basically left needing to sprinkle the expansion. In discussing this with the fire chief and the fire marshal, it makes, and others, including the budget committee and select board, it seems to make sense to sprinkle the entire building. The expansion would just cover, the back anyway, just cover the living area and the quarters, which is incredibly important, but doesn't protect the millions of dollars in assets we have 2 feet away in the apparatus bay, which honestly is probably a much more likely place to have a fire start because of the age of things, the fact that you might have a greasy rag or something hanging around. In any event, this expense was something that we did not want to pursue, but ultimately have to. And if we're going to do it, I guess the thinking is that we wanted to do it right. And so this number is, again, I think on the high side, but would cover the full cost of a full building sprinkler system as estimated by SJ Wood when they gave us a number for this. So we can talk about this now or more later if we have time.
I know a lot on this project has sort of ended up sort of being phased because of construction costs being different than we anticipated as we went through bidding process and so forth. You've mentioned S.J. Wood's estimates a couple of times, and how accurate have you found their work in terms of relation? And obviously this would go out to bid and so forth, but do we think we're in the right zone now with the finalization, if you will, of this these projects?
Yeah, I do. And there are two things that will help us with this. One is that S.J. Wood is a good contractor, but they were bidding this as a builder, subbing with a sprinkler installation system. So there was, I don't know what overhead, but they did have in their cost to do this as part of the current project or the project that was just completed. They had their overhead in that number. Also, their number was for a sprinkler design that was more robust than what is likely going to be required. And that is from a discussion with the fire marshal, the fire marshal's office, I should say. We've had a couple of discussions with them, Lee and I, about our project. And part of their concern initially was that our engineer didn't communicate clearly enough with them what was happening and what needed to happen. And so the fire marshal's office is going to be an integral part of the development and design of this project. When we find a qualified bidder, we'll be having them, working with them and working with the fire marshal's office to put in place a sprinkler system that is not as robust as what was proposed by S.J. Wood, in large part because we've already built in a number of fire protection measures into the building, anticipating that we wouldn't have to have a sprinkler system to begin with. Things like double sheetrock in the living quarters, things like having a false ceiling. If you go into that fire station, you look up, you see a tile ceiling. That's not open to the rafters with insulation above it. That actually is a false ceiling, and we have sheetrock about 18 inches above that that's there as a fire stop. So again, we built a number of things into the station, and I expect that again, after those discussions with the fire marshal's office, we'll be able to do this. We'll be able to complete this project. Yeah, that's about all I have on that one.
Eric, it's Ralph.
Yes.
Just a couple of concerns, or maybe we're getting too deep into the weeds. If I am, stop me. It's my understanding that there are only a couple of sprinkler companies in this state and that they're busy. Assuming we get this approved for July 1, do we have any idea at this point whether or not the project, given the probably the availability of licensed installers that can actually happen during the course of the upcoming fiscal year? And then secondarily, I'm hoping that this number, whatever it turns out to be, includes repair of whatever has to be done to the existing building to put it back in its original state versus just installing the system and saying, okay, now we got to put ceilings in and we got to do more sheetrock and that's an extra.
Yeah. So, first question. Excuse me. First question first. We don't know until we put the RFP out, which will be happening in the next, I'd say, 2 weeks or so. We've got to get a few other RFPs out first. But once that one goes out, we will have an idea of the time frame. If it turns out that we aren't going to have the window to do this, we don't have to expend that money. That can be there. It can be there in reserve for year 2, because these are reserve accounts. This is capital money. So even if it turns out that it will be 18 months, which I think would be on the far end, but again, I'm not certain. We have the money there to do the project, and we've started the planning and design phase, which would certainly draw down some of that money. Again, assuming that it all comes in under that amount, which we expect it to. The second question was around retrofitting, basically, and making sure that we have adequate finish when this goes in. The quote from S.J. Wood included all of that work as well. So again, they were managing it as a builder, and they did add in those components for finished work.
Thank you.
Eric, this is Ellen. I thought this was part of a potential borrowing, though, which would impact timing and ability to stash it away. Would it not?
Well, so typically with bonds, we have, I think, 2 or 3 years to expend the full amount. It's either 2 or 3.
Wouldn't it affect how soon we would get the money in our hands?
No. The way the process works is we would put this on the warrant. We would then proceed with a fall borrowing for the project, and the money would come in the spring.
Okay, that's what I meant. It wouldn't be till this time next year before you have the proceeds to spend it.
But yes, that's right. Yep.
You
Yep.
couldn't, if somebody was available in the summer or fall, you couldn't do it then. On the off chance.
Yeah. Not without some creativity, but yeah, no, you're right. It would not. We would not have these funds in hand until we could do something like a bond anticipation note, but if we don't have to, we would probably be better off not.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Thanks.
Eric,
Yeah.
I have a quick question. I notice on the fund balances that the fire station addition is $30,000 in the hole. Where is that being accounted for?
So I highlighted all those in orange, and I'll show that. That's actually good. It's accounted for in the building reserve that we had put together, and you'll see also the library is overexpended by that amount as well, about $25,000 or $30,000. The reason being that those when we process the bills for that work, we left them in their original accounts. And so what we have is, if you recall, last year we put in that $75,000 building reserve.
Okay.
And so that is there as the offset. So that's the offset. In net, what we have is just $26,000 left for the total project that we had anticipated, right? And so we do have some money available at the end of this year, certainly not enough to proceed with the fire escape or things like that, as we had thought we may. But what it does do, when we get to talking about revenues, offsetting revenues, I'm anticipating drawing down, I just put in around $25,000 to draw down the remainder of that as a use of designated funds in order to offset some of these expenditures for the fire station.
That's great. Thank you.
And Ellen's asked a couple times about bonding. I did originally say that those two projects, because they added up to $250,000, were what we wanted to look at for bonding. I did talk with the main bond bank, and they really don't have an issue with us putting any kind of capital project into a bond. So if, for example, we wanted to put the road paving in as a bond item, or any of, we could put 200,000 of that, and then 50,000 for, probably not for the salt sand check, because that's not an active build. But what I'm getting at is that we have some options about what we include in that borrowing, if and when we proceed with it. So we want to figure that out before we go to town meeting, of course. But I just wanted you all to know that that's an option, that we can be flexible with some of those items. So I'll move on quickly and try to wrap up the discussion here of the spreadsheet. Maintenance, this is a standard line we have for savings. And then we have a new pickup truck with a 5-year lease that totals the rest of that. So in the end, what we have is about $727,000 in borrowing. Some of that offset by use of reserves, some of it coming out of the tax base and some of it coming out of bond proceeds.
You don't mean that that's all borrowing, you mean it's capital.
That's all capital, excuse me. Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to be clear.
Yep. All right. So that's the spreadsheet. That's the detail level. I think we can just take a bit of a break, and I'll try to get anything else people have for questions before we move on. There we go. We can all look at each other for a minute instead of a spreadsheet. All right. So Bruce, did you have anything you wanted to say in the interim before we move on to the slideshow?
No, go ahead.
All right.
Yeah,
Andy, how about you?
actually, I'm all set.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's find PowerPoint. Nope, that's not what I want. Oh, here we go. Nope, that's not it either. Okay, here we go. All right, so this is that same spreadsheet we just looked at in a bit of a summary form. One thing I did through this report was highlight the activity that's happened or is happening during this current fiscal year.
Excuse me, Eric, we're not
Yes.
seeing any, there's nothing on the screen.
All right, let me, what's going on with that?
Well, there's nothing on my screen. Maybe it's on someone else's.
Yeah,
No, there's no
no,
shared screen.
all right, let me try that again. I may have grabbed the wrong screen. Let me try that again. Okay, this ought to do it. Does that look like a PowerPoint to you?
Not really.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Yes.
All right, good. I was starting to get nervous. All right, so let's see if I can get back here to where we were with. I'll just go from current slide. Okay, so this is a restructuring, as I said, of that spreadsheet, and it includes current fiscal year projects, so you can see in blue what we have accomplished this year or expect to accomplish this year. And again, cemeteries, we have that $5,000 reserve that I'm proposing, and you can see below the items that are outstanding that I think necessitate a bit of a reserve. Moving on to the library, again, the roof and insulation was completed in 2021. Egress we've talked about, and I did say interior work in my slide here, so I got it part right. I do have a question about an ongoing reserve for the library. I think once we get the building in good shape, they tend to not have a significant need, but the building does have, it's a wood-sided building, so it may need some additional painting and all that in the future. So right now, I don't know where that stands or if we want to wait a couple of years to start it up again. But I think a $5,000 or $10,000 library reserve probably makes sense. It's just not in this year's budget in large part because of the 50,000 number. Administration, we completed the interior accessibility improvements and also the conversion to digital equipment for the PEG station. That's a big step forward for us, and I'm quite pleased to see that coming to fruition. We're not all the way installed yet, but all the equipment is in place, and we're hooking it up over the course of a few weeks as Bill and his assistant work together on that. We also have that reserve I mentioned, and these are some of those same projects we identified in the spreadsheet earlier. Oh, wrong direction. There we go, parks and activities. Utility upgrades and picnic shelter repairs are on deck for spring of 21. And we did go around a little bit with that at the last budget committee meeting. But I think we've clarified that those are in fact intended to be FY21 projects. And the ball field work, softball field, and open space are what we identified earlier. Bruce had highlighted these two items as needing future discussion. Oh, go ahead.
Do you want to discuss those now, or do we want to just hold that?
It's entirely up to you. Yeah.
What's the druthers of the board?
I would love to hear your thoughts, Bruce.
So my thoughts are very simple on this, and they really don't affect the forthcoming year, but they do perhaps affect the long-term capital consideration. And that is that the beach is really being converted to full use by the town. And so my concern is, are we beginning to look at studying at least and getting a better handle on things that we're talking about perhaps happening in 2025, happening earlier, because we have, by opening the beach to a larger community, the whole community, we're going to create increased traffic, I would think, and increased demand. So it just makes sense to me to, again, I don't see this as happening in 2022, but items that are looked at in 2025, like a storage building or replacement for the picnic activity area, you may want to accelerate those.
I concur.
Okay, well, I'll make a note of that.
Dennis, did you want to follow up with a comment?
Yes. What I think, and I can do this. Hi there, everybody. Great job tonight. Thank you. It's been wonderful to listen. You're all very smart. I think this is very important. I think you raise a good point. The biggest thing for me is that once we open up the beach and we invite people in, it may be difficult to keep them. Like you said, the traffic will, I anticipate there being more traffic at the beach. And so, I think these sorts of things, like you said, may have to be stepped up just because of the actual demand that the people of Readfield won't let them wait longer. And I think that these sorts of things is such a great investment. We've seen people moving to town. We see, the real estate market and things like that. And to be able to offer this, it's pretty great. So I support these things. I think a revamp of the beach area is the next natural step in promoting our town. And so I think those are connected. Thank you very much.
I agree. And I'd actually say if we're going to look at bonding something this year, I would move those up to this year. I think if you're going to bring in a lot of new people, or you're anticipating that will happen, if they come down and it's shabby, they may never come back. You want to have something there. If you want to start having classes and events held there, you have to have a place to do it. You don't want to say, oh, we're going to do it and next year we'll fix it up so it'll be nice to be here. People tend to not return to things that aren't appealing. So I think if we're going to do this, we've got to try and do it right at the outset. I'm done.
Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, this is Marty. Can I stick my 2 cents in, please?
Please, Marty.
Yeah, I'm all in favor of upgrading the beach area. It is a real plus to the town. I think it would be great if we could bring back having a playground, a good, safe playground, that if we could expand the area for children to play in the sand and make their little mud pies and things. So I think that those things should be done. And I don't see the rationale for just spreading it around, over a period of time. Just go ahead and improve everything. One thing that I don't know whether this is feasible at all, the grass area from the parking lot is often very, very wet. And I don't know whether anything could be done in abatement with putting in some culverts or something to, improve drainage in that area.
Yeah, you
We can look at that, yeah.
leaving the beach, don't you, Marty?
Excuse me?
You actually get your feet washed leaving the beach, it
Yeah,
seems.
that's right.
But
That's okay, as long as you
Paddle
have those
bus.
fancy rubber mats in your car.
It's Ralph.
Yeah.
Just a couple of thoughts. I concur that an accelerated development package for the beach area is probably in order if we're going to do it and keep and attract new participants. It's a good thing to do. But if I understand the proposed borrowing number at $250,000, the lion's share of which I believe is spoken for in terms of library egress and sprinkler system for the firehouse, if this is going to be funded primarily by borrowing, we're going to have to up that $250,000 number, at least from my perspective. Budget committee could tell me I'm wrong, I'm sure.
I didn't think we had a final borrowing number yet.
I thought we were working at 250, and if 250 is at least the starter and we accelerate the beach program, I don't think from what I've heard tonight that 250 is going to do it.
And that was my intention, Ralph, is that 45 would be added on top.
Yeah,
I mean, we have to look at how.
I'm certainly for doing that. I want to make sure that we build what is appropriate to the space, though, and I'm not sure we know that yet. So we really do need to talk further with recreation parks and activities, and that's sort of in my wheelhouse right now to initiate some discussion there to understand exactly what they do need and also do some visioning about that. For example, I mean, we have that grassy area that is, as you drive down, do we want kind of a bandstand storage place there, for example? Is that, just instead of building beach storage, can we use some things, and can we get power down there? So there's some discussions that I think go beyond just saying 25 and 20. I'm not sure where those numbers come from.
Yeah, those are
Also,
just estimates, yeah. But go ahead, Ellen, yeah.
just remember that if it's a borrowing, the money isn't in hand for a year from now unless you take out a ban, and to do it right off this summer, you'd have to find some other way to front the funding. Also, I am not convinced you want to encourage large crowds anywhere this summer. I do not think that we are going to be ready for that. So, while I agree with investing in that, it may just, timing is everything here. You can have a gorgeous large activity shelter and not be allowed to use it.
I concur.
Yeah, I mean, my initial discussion of this is I saw this as a future year, a year off. Certainly not for this summer. I don't see that as possible. But I do think we can
sorry.
play.
If you put it in this year and you bond it, then you study it and you figure out what the use is this year, then you can build it in the spring of next year to have it available for the summer. And just by making it available doesn't mean we have to have large groups of people there, but I think you will see increased use, which will probably come over time. Some people will come in the morning, others will come in the afternoon. Some are evening people, some are the winter people who use the spot for ice skating. So it's there for year round.
Yeah, I understand that. I had thought, Catherine, you wanted it to happen now for this summer when we expect increased traffic anyhow because of the waiver of fees, and that if it's shabby this summer, they won't come back next summer. So
Yeah, I mean, Ellen, we may be under COVID restrictions anyhow at the beach. I mean, we'll have rules that we probably need to.
I think we will.
So I mean, these shelters, whatever, I don't see them actually being in place.
Yeah, I was just reacting to what I thought I heard Catherine say.
Right. Well, I think if you've put it in town meeting and they've approved it, then people know that it's going to happen. Whereas if you haven't put it in town meeting and you haven't even talked about doing it, then people are just hoping that you might get around to it. Whereas if we put it in and we plan for it, they know it's going to happen, and you can even involve all those people in helping with ideas.
And on top of it, the beach question was one of the overwhelming yeses. So probably building and showing that we're moving on those projects makes sense. Again, we need to involve some other folks in that, but that was my 2 cents on that, which revolved into 10 cents, I guess.
It was a good discussion. Glad to hear it. Yeah, no, all good points. I do agree that it should be moved up. I think it should be a priority. I have a little bit of concern about, again, the need to do some planning, and I think Bruce has nailed that pretty well. So I guess we'll just hold off initially on that for now. But we are getting a little bit short on time to make those final decisions, though. So I'll just make a point that in the next month, we need to really be nailing this down. So. Moving on to roads and infrastructure, we've talked about this.
We go back.
Yep.
I'd like to bring up my comments on the fairgrounds field work at this point.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
We're getting into detail on many things. When I first heard the idea, I was a little skeptical. I'm glad to hear that Parks and Rec feels that they can raise a lot of the money, so that's needed. But it still leaves me with one concern that I think could be answered pretty quickly, pretty easily, is the usage that we're getting on the baseball field right now. I have no, I go down, park up there to go hiking very frequently, but probably not at the times that people would be playing baseball. So I wonder, is it used so heavily that the same field could not also be used for softball? And concerning the soccer field, even though that was, part of the original comprehensive plan for the area, I'd ask the same question. What is that would justify spending town money and or donated funds? And I would think that if the anticipated usage is not overwhelming, that a step that ought to be considered is approaching the school system, which has a lot of fields, and find out, do they have the capacity with other things that are going on to allow our kids to go play soccer there? Because they have a couple of different fields. So, again, I like the idea of providing all of these organized recreational activity sites for the children, but I always think that when it comes to spending money, that we ought to be looking at, what's our best estimates on usage, so that we don't build something and just have it standing there and not, only being used once, a very small amount of time. So that was my remaining concern.
One thing that I understood from Sean Keegan when he was talking about this is there's been a big concern that as the pandemic hit, the schools retracted, and there's been no public use of any school fields or equipment, spaces, et cetera, because they're dealing with their own guidelines and their own needs. And I think what he expressed to us was that he foresees that continuing on in the future to some extent, that there will be more restriction on public use where the schools can't control virus spread and other issues like that. So it opens up an opportunity where the town can control the use.
Okay. Yeah, and I would not make the mistake of thinking that the COVID situation is going to end anytime soon. I think we're in a race with the virus itself as it mutates. So I wouldn't think of this as, just, well, we'll get through this year and then everything opens up again.
I could speak a little bit to the field and things. Currently, the what we heard from the rec group and what I've talked to Sean in regards to the field is there is no softball field of the rec department that exists in Readfield that isn't owned by the town or the schools. So again, all softball fields that exist in Readfield are owned by the school. So it is a little bit of an equity issue because the program can't be offered through the rec, and they have to go to a different town. So that's part of why they want to try to do that. The other thing is there is a precedent, obviously, I'm not telling you anything new, about especially with outdoor events and game seasons and sports that have happened and are happening now. So I think that if there are any COVID concerns, I think the outdoor nature of it sort of helps that. And I also think that in terms of the equity, I've heard this equity or perceived inequity. It is just inequity. It doesn't exist. So I think it'd be really good to think about those things as we talk about this more and more.
Okay, I just, my final word on it, I think whenever we're looking at, an expenditure, again, even if it's largely financed by residents' donations as well as their taxes, that we ought to be looking at anticipated usage. There's a tendency, and I felt this myself in my career, that one or two people speak very passionately about something, and then that's perceived as if that's a very strong endorsement by all the stakeholders. I do think that there ought to be some effort made if we do create a softball field, between the softball field and the baseball field. What's the usage and expectation? How often is the baseball field used now? And I think the same thing with soccer. I'm sure there are people who love soccer and would like to see the town's kids get involved in it, but how much of a demand is there really? It was somebody just mentioned going to other towns to indulge in sports. Well, how often does that take place? I think that, with the way Eric is plotting out repair and replacement expenditures over a 5-year period, it's, doing it so systematically and making best estimates. I think everything should be approached in that spirit. And maybe the demand is really there, but I don't know if it is, and I don't know if anybody knows if it is.
I think there is demand there, but I'm going on the words of the others. So I do think, Marty, you're right. We need to get a little bit more qualifying information on that. And so I will try to seek that out. I do know that on the baseball end, that the program between practicing and games was very robust. And indeed, we needed to expand the parking lot to handle some of that robustness to get the traffic, get those cars off of Church Road. We did that. And my assumption is that they anticipate running a very robust softball program as well. But you're right. I mean, we need some qualifiers there so we understand better what the vision, intent, and projected use is. Thank you.
I can tell you guys that from going to Fielder's Choice more often than I should, and seeing the fields in Manchester, there are people out on the baseball fields, the playground, the tennis courts, all the time on the weekends and in after school hours. And I don't think those are all organized activities. I think a lot of that is pickup. Families go out and they play. And I think you can't encourage people to do that if you don't have a place to do it. And I think you'll see a lot of that. This is a really robust organization we have with our rec department. I think they have a good pulse, so it'll be interesting to have them bring us some information on that.
Thank you, Kathleen. We're in a workshop mode, so I don't think we're going to take motions or anything. Is everybody comfortable working a little further to make sure we finalize our discussion? I don't see any no's, so we'll just continue. Go ahead, Eric.
All right, thanks. So roads and infrastructure, we did, or we likely will be paving Plains Road as part of this year's budget. The Torcy Pond Bridge repair was completed, and that was great to see that get done. That was a partnership with the Torcy Pond Lake Association, and I felt really good about that project. We had some great support from the Lake Association, or I guess it's the Torcy Pond Association, and it was a great partnership because they owned, the dam that is physically attached to our bridge, and we worked together to get it repaired. So that was a highlight for me anyway. And then the LED streetlight conversion. The conversion is completed. We haven't yet finalized the addition of the additional lights, but we are working on that. So those are some of the highlights that we had from this year. We've talked about the paving going forward, the salt sand shed and the sidewalk. And then we do have ongoing paving expenses, the salt sand shed, which is I'm expecting to be about $250,000 when it's done, but we may need to adjust that in future years. And the Church Road sidewalk construction, this I believe is the final amount, and that would be for a $400,000 project, construction project, with the town contributing a portion of that. So that's what I see right now for that project.
Eric,
Yes.
it looks like we're going to have 40,000 already in our reserve fund that'll go towards that 80,000. Is that correct?
Yes, we do have 40,000 in reserve, although I think we're planning on drawing down 9.
Well, we have 50.
Oh, that's okay. Yep. So that's right. You always do the math before me. So yeah.
Well, I'm
That's
using
right.
your spreadsheet.
Yeah. Well, I can't do that stuff unless I look at it. But no, you're absolutely right, then. Yes. So about half of that is already in hand to complete the work.
Great.
Good point.
Yeah, this is just an aside comment. I really like the idea of doing Church Road in conjunction, the paving in conjunction with the timing of the sidewalk. I thank you for the road committee making sure that we do that.
Yeah,
'Cause
absolutely.
There's also, and so I'm kind of playing for residents perhaps here, but I do know on the lower part of that road, there's issues with speed, and I'm hoping that the sidewalk and whatever project we do in terms of paving, there may even be some other aspects of traffic calming that we may want to incorporate into that.
I think there will be, absolutely. And that's part of the design and engineering phase that we're endeavoring on this year. We'll be able to ascertain what, if anything, additionally we might want to do. I'm fairly certain that road is going to get narrowed up a little bit because there's so little real estate to begin with that if we're trying to avoid cutting trees and things like that, we might need to, squeeze a little. And that's honestly one of the best ways to slow traffic. All right, so transfer station, we do have the compactor that was replaced this year. That was a big improvement for us. All the kinks have been worked out, and it was a $40,000 expense. So between that and the backhoe, that's what really put us in a bit of a hole operationally, or not operationally, but as far as our capital program goes. But the backhoe lease and compactor lease are ongoing, and both of those are going to be for the next, I think, 4 years at least. And then looking forward, we have the access loop. This one might come up sooner than we want. we've already hit mud season up there, and we had to put down some cold patch today because of failing right after you turn onto that old road. So that might be coming up sooner than we want. And then we have some container replacement and the roof system, which again is something that is very much desired, but we're going to have to think more and plan more on how to make that happen.
Let's just
Right.
bump the whole area. Get the salt and sand and everything covered.
It's not a bad idea, but we'd have to go through DEP to change the location. So, yeah. Any event, the building expansion was completed in 2021. Less, of course, the sprinkler, which is coming up. The equipment reserve we talked about, and we have engine 61 replacement coming up. I think that's 3 years out. One thing that I have noted in the past is that we may have the opportunity to get a truck donated from the town of Cambridge, Mass, which would be fantastic. Lee had given me a couple of examples of what the truck was going to potentially be and look like, but I haven't talked with him in the last couple of weeks on that. I think that's still in the cards, but COVID has slowed that down. So I am definitely going to be following up on the potential for a new to us pumper truck that would maybe put this $400,000 expense off for a few years. And then again, the general equipment reserve for the fire department, which we mentioned. Moving on to yes,
You
Ralph.
really
Yep.
think you're gonna buy a new fire truck for $400,000 in 3 years?
I don't know. I think it depends on.
Not new. That's about the
Okay.
going rate right now.
Yeah, I think we paid like $360 for the last one, but that was a couple of years ago. But it depends too on whether it's a pumper or a tanker. And so, but I this is one of those numbers that's here as a placeholder. And as we get a little bit closer, we will get more information on it. But, if I'll talk to Lee and see if he thinks that number is still accurate. That's a good answer there. Moving on to maintenance. We did purchase a new pickup truck in 21, and we also paid off the Bobcat lease. So those two almost, well, I guess they don't come out ahead. If you account for the equipment reserve, it's not that different. But the pickup truck lease is $6,000. The equipment reserve is $15,000. And we talked about those two things earlier. We do have some small power equipment coming up for replacement, the mower, plow and sander. Those are little items, but we want to make sure we keep track of them because an $8,000 expense can wreck a budget pretty quick. And capital investment summary, again, $727,000 in total expenditures. We have $64,270 in use of designated funds. And one thing I'll note is that in a prior example or prior version of this slideshow, I had that number at 114. But what I realized I was doing was actually using $50,000 out of reserve and also putting $50,000 into reserve around paving. And so that didn't make any sense. So I just, zeroed those two out and leaves us with this new number. That's a lower designated fund usage than what we've seen in the past, but I think we're just the way the projects fall is why that is. Again, the sidewalk grant, $36,000 for that, $45,000 donations for the field, and the bond, which is again a placeholder based on a couple of projects, and those could also move around as I noted. So, and as always, capital expenditures are offset by undesignated fund uses and tax dollars. Debt service for long-term debt. This doesn't include things like capital leases. This is for bonds only. And this shows the anticipated amounts by fiscal year. And in red is what more or less, I haven't talked to the bond bank specifically, I've just used a bond calculator, about what what a $250,000 bond would look like. But that is for a 15-year, that's not right. Yeah, Catherine, help me out here. We're in 2021, so 2037 is 50. It is a 15-year bond. Yep.
Right, because you'd only be doing interest in the first year.
That's right. So first year interest, and this is what we have. This doesn't include things like bonding for fire trucks. It doesn't include bonding for a potential broadband project. This is just what we've got right now on the books, and then that one anticipated number. So that's the presentation, and I'll go back to shared screen so we can all look at each other again. Yeah, all right. So I think we had a couple of items. There's my pen. I think Marty had some questions about the library. I think everything else has been covered.
Did I?
What is the anticipated usage of the second floor in the library? That's storage, meeting space, what?
Yes and yes. Those are the two anticipated uses. They want to have it for storage in the back, maybe a small reading room, and the front they anticipate using for their meetings.
I want to repeat my often stated concern about planning a public facility that is not handicapped accessible. I think that that's bad policy. And if there's no reasonable way of making the second story of the library handicap accessible, I don't feel that it's appropriate to develop it as public meeting space.
That's a good point, Marty.
When we talked about this a couple of years ago, we had talked about whether it would be feasible to do a stair lift, like the Historical Society has. And I don't know how much they cost, but they're not terribly expensive. But
Right.
you have to have a big enough stair that you can put it on.
Yeah, since it's a straight run, I would guess it's probably, assuming the staircase is wide enough and sturdy enough, I would guess about $3,000. Is based on my in-laws having had to put.
My initial guess is going to be it's not wide enough and not sturdy enough.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. I think it's sturdy enough, but not wide enough, and it curves.
I would encourage the friends of the library.
If the library committee intends to use that as a meeting space for their board meetings, that's one thing. But I do think you're right, Marty. If they're going to have a talk and have 30 people there, we need to make sure that anybody who has any needs is able to access whatever talk or program there is. And so
Or
that does.
board meeting, or, or library board meeting.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit more, I think you can schedule to meet that a little easier. But in any case, even if we're just using it for sheer storage or whatever, the egress issue for somebody who might be working up there alone on storage, if a fire were to occur or something of that nature, I think it's important to still have that.
I totally agree with that. I think that, I had understood from conversations we had about this at the last budget committee meeting that maybe $35,000 of the 50 was for the egress issue, and the balance was for finishing off the second floor. And if this is going to be a borrowing, I really think it's inappropriate to throw finishing an interior. That's an operating expense. That is not a bonding expense. We don't get operating bonds.
If it's
No, we don't. Yeah.
If it's construction, is that considered to be part of a bondable expense?
It's not construction though, as I understood it. The construction is done, but for putting the outside stairway on.
Well, there's a room on the back corner that is going to be reconstructed. It's lath and plaster and it needs to be taken apart and rebuilt. It's not a
And
paint
that
and
wasn't
paper
part of
kind
the
thing.
initial project then. So this is the project that keeps on giving.
Every angle, every possible way,
Yeah.
Ellen, it continues to cost us more.
I just want to make the point that I don't think, finishing an interior, an operating expense should be paid out of operating funds and not bonded, in my view. So that's what I understood what was going on from our conversation at our committee meeting, and it may have evolved at this point.
It really hasn't. I think that description of having a majority of it be the fire escape and a smaller portion being the interior work still holds true. And so I agree. I think that if there's concern about that and it's valid, which I think it is, then we should look at a different, maybe bonding a different item. We could propose bonding $50,000 of the paving work as a possibility. I'm not saying that this is inconsequential, but if we're borrowing, I mean, I think we do have the option of a general obligation bond as well. But I think that for construction, we ought to be putting in, like you said, solid projects. The sprinkler system for the fire station, definitely. There's 200, and if we wanted to pull 50 out of roads, that would be a more appropriate use, I think.
And I just want to state that the library board, every time we've spoken with them, Ralph and I did a walkthrough with Eric last summer at some point. It's for library board use. They're not anticipating bringing the general public there because it's not handicapped accessible. And if they had an accessibility need, then they would meet downstairs. That's always
my
been their
understanding too.
right.
But you also don't want that to become prohibitive in any way to volunteers who may have a challenge or whatever not to volunteer.
Right.
I mean, it does raise the question. I mean, $50,000 would go a long way towards an addition on the first
Well,
floor.
I don't have a problem with the egress being in the bond.
Yeah.
No, we bonded it already once. It just ran over. So,
I don't like that any more than you do, Ellen.
yeah.
I think it was market circumstances. But in any case, so I think you need to back out what could be called renovations on the second floor, Eric, from that bond.
I will
I
also
think
say,
that's kind of general sense. I think if you're restructuring something to build it for a completely different use, that makes sense to me. But I don't want to use the light word redecorating, but if it's more material,
Well,
that.
it's things like new lighting in the upstairs that's up to code and is efficient. And they put
a lot
a
of
heat pump in
drywall
up
work.
there already. Right.
Yep.
And it's the redoing of the lath and plaster that's falling in that one room and new flooring to make it safe and appealing since we spent all this money to redo the rest of the building. It seems it's a lot like what we did to fix the existing part of the office space in the fire station. But I don't care how we do it as long as we do it. I don't care what pot it comes out of. So that's what we leave to the budget committee to make those best decisions.
I think in the public, in public entity accounting, the barrier between repair and capital is not as sharp as it used to be. So I don't know that I think the important issue is, do you want to borrow for just routine repair and maintenance, which is just building up debt, or do
Right.
you want those repair and routine maintenance things funded from current revenues? I think that's the important thing, to look at your
I
budget.
agree. I agree.
Yeah, I think there may be a take-back discussion too to have with the library board of trustees, Eric, and maybe other members will think this as well. We need to, as a town, make sure our investments are in structures that we really feel are appropriate to use. And I served on the library board of trustees at one point, and we always met, for example, at the school because the upstairs was not a warm place to meet. And I'm not sure if converting that to a meeting place is the most sensible approach. It may be that the town says, we want to have what we've done in the downstairs be our signature for that library. We do want to have good storage upstairs so a person can work up there labeling books or whatever and can get out safely. But that's what we see. I'm not trying to give direction back to the library board of trustees, but I think there's a hard conversation to have there.
Yeah,
Okay,
my last word is, and I'm totally supportive of the library, but I do just also want to make clear, we have so little debt, and debt is so cheap right now that we should not hesitate to bond. I just want us to be careful what we're borrowing for and make sure it's appropriate.
Ellen, I agree with you completely, and I would add that this very favorable interest rate environment for borrowing may not last forever. I think as the COVID situation is tamed to whatever degree, and the economy starts to perk up, the Federal Reserve is going to start easing up on all their corrective measures.
Right.
And I think we're going to see interest rates go up. So if we do have to borrow, I would think this is the right time to do it.
Well, and I think debt is healthy for a municipality or a government.
Well, when I was a business consultant, I always told people it's a good thing to use your money, your own money, to make money, but it's an even better thing to use someone else's money.
So would the budget committee, I guess I would ask you to discuss this, or maybe you already have, but are there other capital projects that we should consider bonding for now, even if we know we're not going to do them in the next fiscal year because of the availability of the money and the cost of that money? So something that's out, not this coming year, but the year after, would it make sense to bond for that now?
I think acceleration of the beach project makes sense. And I mean, when I say acceleration, I mean the two structures that are talked about, which may be one structure, I don't know. But that would happen in the spring of 22.
Yeah, you'd have to get a move on your visioning thing pretty quickly to throw it in, a warrant. But, I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, we're retiring a road bond. So I don't think it would be bad to bond for more road work.
Well, that's a good question. Should we just take out another road bond?
I would ask Eric, do you think that if we did borrow more for road upgrades, that there are contractors available to do more than Sturtevant Hill Road and Plains Road?
I think there are. The one thing that I would, wonder about would be the need. I mean, not to go back to David Trunell's points, but he was pushing pretty hard on, why are you paving this stuff when it's barely getting old? But I think that, Church Road, that could be something that we would potentially be able to move up. I think that right now, though, we've got 2024. I'll have to look into this more. I know that the bond bank wants us to utilize those funds in a reasonable period of time. I think it's 3 years, but I will definitely check on that.
Well, that's the legal requirement. It's arbitrage.
Yeah, well, we're not allowed to make interest on it anyway.
I'm invested in the stock market.
Yeah, it would be great if we could, but no, you're absolutely right. We're not allowed to invest that money. It has to stay in
Yes,
a low or no interest bearing account. I can't remember which, but it's not, we're not allowed to make money off of it. But I mean, Beaver Dam Road, it might not be a bad idea to plug that one in because it does, Lane Road definitely could be done. So yeah, I mean, Balsam Drive is good for another 20 years in my view because it's just a driveway. But um, the I'll look at it. That's a very good point and a very good question, and I'll talk to the road committee and see if they have interest in doing a couple of these roads over the next few years, and just see if that's a possibility for us.
Or maybe we should throw the sand and salt shed in, whichever design you're going with. But I mean, if you're looking at not having to expend the funds in the next year and you could do it in the next 2 years, that would still give you adequate time to do your due diligence in research and design, but you'd have the funding secured at the low rate. So I'm just asking the budget committee to consider what they think is the best path forward for the town.
Ellen, do we have any idea what the cost is to have bond money in queue, so to speak, before we use it? Is there a charge for that? And if so, what is the debt service going to be on unexpended but committed funds?
In year one, it's just the interest.
All right, but so you would be paying interest on the full amount that you borrow.
Right?
Yeah, and that's almost always the case. We don't typically have like a line of credit type account where you would only pay interest on what you've pulled down. We almost always, and maybe there's a different bond structure that I'm not aware of, but we always have a fixed schedule. So it doesn't matter whether the money's in the bank or whether it's been expended. We pay the same amount.
Right, and then you'd start paying principal in the year two payment,
Yep, that's right.
whether you've paid a contractor or not.
But at least it gives you the option to line up contracts and to have design take place in a thoughtful manner.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
So
That's a good-
I think we're agreeing that we are looking at the bond capacity and asking for a revisit to see what would go into an actual 22 bond or pair of bonds, however we want to package it for the warrant. Is that correct?
I think so. Yeah.
The direction I took.
And I don't think $250,000 ought to be some sort of hard target. I think it might be 325, it might be 275, I don't know. But whatever the packages are between roads and the structural items, I study it and bring forth a proposal, I guess.
well, and we've got a lot budgeted in the next 2 years to pay for projects. So it's kind of a swapping of allocation. It's not increasing the amount we're spending. It's just it's just changing the way we're funding.
Well, and that may be getting us to a more stable debt ratio to the money we decide to raise from taxes over the long term.
That's the whole point of this process.
I understand.
Eric, what is pushing up the bond number due to the, the final calculation?
Well, yeah, that's I guess it makes us go from a more or less neutral budget position to one where we have a tax increase. And so one of the reasons I landed on that $250,000 number was that it, with that very minimal debt service for interest, it allowed us to maintain a flat budget.
So I guess that, what's the priority, here from the select board's perspective? Is it to keep no increase? Set the school aside. We already know they've gone from no increase to some increase. I think, what did Becky say? Becky, was 4% the last time you,
It was over
Yeah.
4% the last time. But last night we just had another budget meeting and it was down to 3.97 and they're still working at it.
3.97. Well, at that rate, we'll be at 3.92 by the time it's done.
They are working
Let's
hard.
not second guess that. We'll be meeting with them in March, and they did a remarkable job last year, and
yeah, they were phenomenal.
came from other directions too that may come into play here. I guess the select board asked Eric from the get-go to be considerate because of the economic situation in relation to COVID, to try to retain the town's portion as fairly flat. Eric, $100,000 is what on the mill rate?
I can answer that accurately. Just give me 1 second.
Catherine?
We also want to be careful of being penny wise and pound foolish. I'm just going back to what both Marty and Ellen said about it's historically low borrowing rates right now. So I just think if you guys look at that, you can come back with what you think is the best balance of borrowing versus taxes. We don't want taxes to go up much.
Yeah, I mean, my one caution comes back to the whole COVID and economic situation, and that is because, unfortunately, we just don't know how that's affected families in Readfield. But I can say this, that families like mine that have the ability to work from home and do things, or semi-retired or whatever, are least affected, and I don't know how others, they may still be working, but they may be working at lower capacity. They may have additional bills that have occurred in relationship to other factors in their lives. So I'm just trying to make sure that we're sensitive to that. And I'm all for not being foolish in terms of, little pennies. But that was kind of my charge at the beginning, was to be considerate of that factor alone in this coming year. So, I mean, if we're talking a dime or something like that, that's one thing. We can't do $1.
Yeah, no. Well, and so, I mean, it wouldn't be that much at all. I mean, so basically, if you doubled the borrowing to, you would double that initial interest payment, which might add $25,000 to the overall, I mean, to a $6 million budget when you include the school. So it's
1,000 tick.
It's not much. And so actually I can show you the actual calculation for mills right now with, this is the draft 4. It's not perfectly balanced because I've been tweaking it, but in essence, this is the amount we have to raise from taxes. This is the value of 1 mil, 291,000, and the tax impact of $100,000 is 0.34 mils. So
$25,000 in interest is going to be less than a dime.
Yeah, it would be 8.5.
So we can use you elsewhere then. Great.
0.09, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Let me get that out of here. Okay. Was there anything else that folks had that they wanted to talk about, or
If you don't
long-term
mind,
discussions?
I have a question, and I should know this, but I forgot. When is the broadband access project going to start hitting the budget?
We don't know.
Jeez. Should I go or should you go, Catherine?
Nothing in this, but I would expect something in the next budget. And the broadband committee has just been reformed, and we're looking at what we've already done with the Western Kennebec Lakes Consortium. It looks like the 6 towns in that are looking for something that would begin next year. So the 2022 budget into 2023. So that would be your beginning 2-year cycle. And we have no idea really what that's going to look like at this point in time.
Thank you.
Did I do well, Eric?
Better than I would have done. So yeah, thank you.
I think the answer to that is that in the forthcoming year, there has to be a lot of discussion and public input if we're going to bring forward this project, which I do believe in, but it's got to really be something that has that a very robust discussion inside the town.
Well, and the governor just came out in I don't know, yesterday, it was in today's news, that we have to do something about this. It's all the things that we've been talking about. But again, everything that's being proposed on the federal and state level is all for underserved communities, and Readfield is not one of those. So no matter when they do something, it's not going to come to us. Other towns in the consortium are not in that situation. So there's the possibility that if we do something as a 6-town or multi-town group, that Readfield could benefit from some of that, because we would be a group that is comprised of underserved and served towns. So there's a lot to look into.
One final comment, and this is probably off the wall. We have a beautiful facility, a beautiful building in town that's not being used. It's not a town property, but it's not being used for anything. It was not even legally built, but it still is a beautiful facility down by the Mill Stream Dam. And I wonder, if some thought could be given that in the long run, at some point, this might be an asset for the town to own. I mean, it's really beautiful.
I have no comment.
Okay.
Yeah,
Marty,
yep.
Marty, which building are you speaking of?
Great.
Oh, come on.
Well, I don't want to.
He has a big barn.
He's talking about Batar's property, and it's
Anyway,
it's a hotbed of problems. So we should not discuss it, I don't think.
okay.
I agree.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's okay. It's a fair question.
Not to bring something forward. Thank you.
I
Andy,
think this has been a great conversation. Eric, you did a fabulous job with all of the documents. Everything put together was everything that at least I needed to be able to have a great discussion. I want to just express to the budget committee what I said at our last select board meeting, and that was, Ellen, wow, your minutes are awesome. I read your minutes, and then everyone else had too. And when Eric went to do his budget presentation, we were like, we already got this. Ellen explained it all already, and it hardly took any time. So the work you folks are doing.
I'm glad they're helpful.
Yeah, well, the work you folks are doing and then your explanation of it has been really great for the select board. So we really appreciate you folks.
That's good. We have a meeting in 2 weeks. And so we hope Eric will have a lot of exciting stuff queued up for us to figure out.
No pressure.
Is that on March 11th, Andy?
Yes.
And are we meeting with the school board on the 10th?
we're meeting with the school board on the 10th. And actually, I will give Eric a note on that. But they've asked that 2 of us attend in person and the rest remote. So we should figure out who our representatives in person are going to be. I'm going to volunteer because I usually do speak at that meeting. But we'll decide that later.
I know I really appreciated seeing all the select board members there last year. It made me proud.
There, aren't we?
And I think we were the only town who did that.
Yeah. Well, I'm ready to conclude the meeting if you are, Andy. And Eric, unless you have a question to the greater group to clarify anything, I'm going to go ahead and hit the gavel if Andy's in agreement with that.
I am in agreement.
Okay, you all set, Eric?
I am all set. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate all the work the Budget Committee does. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Well,